Good
evening and welcome to this Sunday supper. My name is Elizabeth Almonte, and it is my sincere pleasure to welcome you to our table today. I work with the Eagle Academy Foundation under our CEO and President, David C. Banks, and I serve as a Chief Innovation Officer. The Eagle Academy Foundation is part of a consortia of wonderful nonprofit leaders of color who have joined forces to bring together content for us and by us to serve our communities at large around issues that really affect us and matter to us. Obviously, such as the COVID 19 pandemic, as well as the issues around systemic racism, whether it relates to educational, cultural, or economic concerns in our community. So we are delighted to welcome you this evening, and I hope that you are ready for a full meal for your heart, mind, body, and soul. And with that, tonight's theme of our Sunday supper is called The Future is Everywhere, Shifts in Education in the Face of Innovation. And the reason for this theme is that it is a topic that, as we emerge from this pandemic, and certainly look to come out of the ashes like phoenixes, there is a lot of change underway. And we want to ensure that you have information so that you know how to step forward um, as all of this innovation comes into play, but also so that you are empowered and well equipped to know how you can pivot yourselves in preparation for the massive growth that's about to happen with what is called the fourth industrial revolution. It is the most prosperous economic projection in terms of era of our time. And so we invite you to keep an open mind and open heart and in understanding that together, as we work to reimagine education, we can really have education be what it is meant to be, which is the greatest equalizer known to mankind. And it's a way by which our communities of color, particularly brown and Black communities, can actually find financial freedom, that education is the pathway to economic prosperity. And so we need to set ourselves up for that as best we can. So with that, I'd like to invite you all. First of all, I want to thank the audience. Many of you submitted questions ahead of this discussion today of our Sunday supper, and so we've actually incorporated that in the program. But if you should have any additional questions, please be sure to drop them in the Q&A box. We will take care of or try to get to as many questions as we can in our dessert course this evening. And certainly, if you have any comments or reaction, please feel free to drop your comments in the chat box. We have folks from our staff and our team, wonderful folks, manning that and make sure we get you the answers that you need. Just as a quick reminder, all of our wonderful organizations, a consortia of organizations, are available to be followed on social media. So we will actually put the social media accounts in the chat box so that you can go ahead and follow us and see what's going on as far as resources that you might be able to take advantage of. All righty. So with that, I am delighted, absolutely delighted for an amazing conversation today to welcome you, obviously, as an audience, as we begin our Sunday supper. Our Sunday supper is served. I invite you to pick up a favorite adult beverage. Obviously, for our teens and kids, please just grab, some bottled water. Thank you very much. But know that we are excited to have you. And Sunday supper, our first appetizer course, is served with our introduction of our amazing and distinguished panelists tonight. We are joined by two incredible high school scholars, Dariana, who happens to be my incredible niece, and Noelle. And then we are also joined by our luminous alum from New York, Christopher Walker, who happens to be the son of our dear Consortia of Color CEO, Sheena Wright, from the United Way of New York City. And then we also have a fantastic entrepreneur, Tanisha Colon Biv, who actually joins us all the way from South Africa. Really excited to have her join us. She is an incredible entrepreneur, and this panel is just going to shed a lot of light to us from their perspectives, their life's perspectives, academic journeys, but as well as career aspirations and career journeys as it relates to reimagining education going forward. Um, so with that, welcome. Thank you for joining us, panelists. I would like to start with a quick introduction. If you can share with us who you are, where you're from, how New York, how you relate to New York, what your educational journey is, and what your career journey has been, and/or career aspirations for our students. And then finally, at the end, I'll just ask if you could, in one word, if you could describe innovation using one word, what would that be? So I will start with Dariana, and then we'll go to Noel, followed by Chris, and then Tanisha.
Hi, everybody. Good evening. My name is Dariana. I'm an 11th grade student at the Riverdale Country School, which is in the Bronx, New York. I'm actually from Rockland County, New York, so it's a little ways away, about 40 minutes, I would say, from the Bronx. Before I went to Riverdale, which is a private independent school, I actually attended public school from kindergarten to the 8th grade in the East Ramapo Central School District, which is also based in Rockland County. In terms of career aspirations, I'm really interested right now in criminal justice reform and criminal law, and I'm looking to explore that through applications in either computer science or data science. And I'm really excited to be here today.
For that. What about your one word for innovation?
Oh, right. Thank you. My one word for innovation, I think, would be empowering. I think it's really exciting to see what's happening and using those tools to use it the most effectively.
Thank you. Noel?
Hi guys, how you doing? My name is Noel. I go to school in 49th Street, the Business of Sports School. I'm originally from Harlem and I still live in Harlem. Unlike Darinara, like I have the opportunity to, from kindergarten to 12th grade, I have been in public school. My career aspirations right now are like real estate. At first, it wasn't because when I went to business of sports school, it was sports. But then the business of sports school taught me that there's more to like sports. There's like business behind it, and it taught me how to think like an entrepreneur. Um, and right now, I just want to continue my journey, and I really like appreciate having this opportunity. And
That's
one word for
phenomenal.
innovate, yeah, and one word for innovation that I could probably think of is like enlightenment. Um, I just feel like it's very different, you know, and
Hmm.
innovation can help all of us.
That's that. Why don't you enlighten us, Noel, and
Yeah,
share with us
yeah,
the three businesses that you actually own?
yeah. So I have a cooking business on Instagram. I am also an eBay seller, and I also am a sneaker seller. So yeah, and I got that all from my high school.
Incredible.
Thank you,
Fantastic.
thank you,
Thank you for
thank you.
sharing. Christopher, could you tell us a little bit about your background?
Yeah, so I'm Chris. I was born and raised in New York in Harlem. I went to Fieldston, which is a private school in the Bronx for high school. Then went to Chicago for college, where I majored in physics, and then worked out of college at a company called Forward, which is the idea is if you build everything from the ground up, the doctors, the software, the hardware, analytics, and sensors, can you prevent people from getting sick rather than kind of only treating them once they're sick? And then now I work on satellite software at SpaceX. And one word for innovation, I think I would say resilience. I think oftentimes when you try something new, it's very likely to not work out the first time. And you've got to be willing to keep trying for there to be kind of a payoff from it.
Thank you for that, Christopher. Where did you go to school? Just for the benefit of the teens watching at home? Oh, did he freeze? Okay, we'll come back to you, Christopher. No worries. Go ahead, Tanisha.
Hi, good evening. I'll speak for Chris. He went to University of Chicago, if people didn't hear that, for undergrad. My name is Sneisha Cologne Bibb. I'm very excited to be here. Zoom, we all love Zoom. So it's nice to meet you all virtually, digitally. Innovation, right? Zoom. We'll talk about that at the end. So I currently live in Johannesburg. As Elizabeth mentioned, I love it here. If anyone ever has any plans to come to South Africa, definitely let me know. Or any, or a few other countries in West Africa I've been to as well. I am from Harlem, New York, originally. I'm a proud Harlemite. I attended public school from kindergarten through third grade. And then I went to Manhattan Country School, which is the independent school from fourth through eighth. And then I attended Phillips Academy Andover, which is a boarding school in Andover, Massachusetts for high school. And then I went to an HBCU, total 180. I went to Spelman College in Atlanta for my undergrad. And I've been an entrepreneur for about 8 years, going on 9 years now. I have a business in communications and public relations. And then I also have a talent management company for content creators and different types of talent. Yeah, and my one word for innovation would be access.
Access. Wow. Amazing. So we have empowering, enlightenment, resilience, and access. Did I tell you guys that we are going to have an amazing panel discussion? The breadth and depth of experience on this panel is just incredible. Thank you so very much for joining. I know that the families, parents, teens, students, educators, policymakers that are watching now are going to gain a lot from your perspective. So thank you for the breadth, from private school to public to boarding, to West Coast, to motherland, to everything in between. It's all covered here. So thank you for joining us. We're gonna shift now into, as we finish our appetizers over our Sunday supper, we're gonna shift to a little video. But before I do, I would like to ask everybody on the call in the chat to drop what is your one word that you would use to describe innovation. Given that that's the topic of our discussion tonight, I want to see, let me see, drop the gems in the chat and let me see what is your definition, your one word that you would use to describe innovation. Innovation. Vision. I see vision. I see opportunity. I see next. I see advancement. Okay, beautiful. So clearly there are a plethora of adjectives that we can use to describe innovation. And with that, I want to call and honor in this space and acknowledge, right, that our ancestors really fought for us to be in a position today to decide and reimagine education, their long, hard fought battle. And so I would like to call and remember their memory as we prepare to reimagine what is possible. We say ashe, we thank them, and we proceed with our video. I'd like you to keep in mind as you're watching the video, whether you think your word or not matches what's in the video. Thank you. Nancy. I think the sound is off, Nance. All righty. Sound looks like we're having a little sound check difficulties. We will take it another shot and see. Nancy, give me an update, and we'll otherwise we'll go ahead and proceed.
One moment.
Okay.
Once upon a time, business as usual was often good enough. No more. Where we are going, good enough is dead. In a world where everything is connected, where everything is equally excellent, where performance is reaching perfection, there's only one space left to innovate in: you. Right now, you are a central point in the raging tornado of change fueled by digitization, mobilization, augmentation, disintermediation, automation. Well, the list goes on. Science fiction is becoming science fact. Think about self-driving cars or computers that can learn and think. The way we work will never be the same. The skills we need will be dramatically different. Winning or losing are now happening faster than ever before. So what's your response? How will you discover new opportunities in one of the most transformational times in human history? Are you driving change, or are you being driven by it?
So that is the question that we will ask ourselves and reflect on as we embark on this conversation. With that, now that you have a sense for what you think innovation means for you, and also a sense for what the world is telling us innovation is driving us towards, how I'd like to bring up a poll, and this is an interactive Sunday supper, guys. We're drinking, we're eating, but we are nourishing our heart, mind, and soul. So if we can bring up the poll, I would like some audience interaction. Noel, would you read our poll question that you have all come up with for our audience?
Of course. Okay, so the question is, how well is your life now going to prepare you for how the world will operate in the next decade?
Thank you for that, Noel.
Of course.
We will give it about a good 20, 30 seconds. Let's see. Okay. Getting there. Okay. So it looks like the majority feels somewhat prepared for all of this innovation that is before us in the fourth industrial revolution. And wow, good, 11% are prepared. So that's fantastic. That's good to hear. Okay. All right. So let's proceed. As our main course is served, I invite you all to grab your first bite as I ask our panelists, and we delve a little deeper into reimagining what's possible. So with that, the first question I have is, when you reflect on your K-12 education, panelists, be it public schools or private schools, what, in your opinion, should we keep? What should we change? And then what should we add? So I'll go ahead and start with Dariana first, and then we'll move on to Noel, followed by Tanisha, and then Chris.
Well, I think, speaking from my experience, something that's worked really well is like interdisciplinary studies, at least in my school, and the ability to not only find the intersections between multiple courses, but also like putting that education in context and being able to apply that in the real world. So in Riverdale, there's a course called Constructing America, which combines both English and history. And it's similar to a public school like AP US history, if you're familiar. And one of the topics that we actually had to do was analyzing the failures of Reconstruction and seeing how that connects to a current topic in like the current world in terms of like the Black Lives Matter protests that have happened or other things of that nature. So I think that's really interesting to see like the connections and the parallels and making learning very relevant to today. In terms of improvement, I think effective discourse is something that's really lacking in Riverdale, or something that needs to be amended, in the sense that I go to a predominantly white institution. So when we're having these conversations about racial equity or even like racial disparities in terms of like the pandemic and the coronavirus, there's a lot of people whose voices aren't being heard in these conversations. So I think it's really about, how do we acknowledge the voices that aren't being heard, and how do we have an effective communication that's encompassing all of those voices and all of these different opinions. In terms of what really is missing in my education, I would say is financial literacy. I think going to a private school, a lot of people expect like, oh, all these people are the richest of the rich. Like they have their money set, like they know what they have to do. But the truth of the matter is a lot of people who go to these private schools do not come from these elite socioeconomic backgrounds. So I think it's really important, like, yes, we're gonna have a good education and we're going to be successful academically, but how are we going to use this academic success to help us financially so we can be as successful as we can be and continue building that wealth? So I think that's how I would respond to that question.
Incredible insight. Is there anything you would add the financial literacy? Is there anything you would change, Dariana?
Yeah, changing, I'd say like the way that we talk and like our discourse about like uncomfortable
Yeah.
conversations.
Got it. The
Right.
collaboration. Gotcha.
Yes.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing. Noel?
So things I felt that like worked well for me is my teachers like being very involved. I know this depends on the school and where you go at. But I feel like my teachers besides school, they have been like very involved outside of school. And I benefit, like my school offers like a lot of different classes that can prepare you for like the real world. So like entrepreneurship, accounting, virtual enterprise, economics, like the list goes on. So I feel that that has worked for me. And I feel it's really good, especially like in the world we're heading in with like everything technology, investing. Those are like really beneficial classes. Something that I feel like needs improvement is like the standardized test, because I feel like a lot of pressure is put on standardized testing, because a lot of people may not be a good test taker, and like it limits them into like maybe getting into a college they may want to get into, or like limiting like their visions, which is like I feel like needs improvement. And some things I feel like is missing is like the connection, because I feel like a lot of people are like in competition with a lot of people nowadays, instead of like collaborating, coming together and like figuring out like a solution that everybody could like work together and think for better solutions.
Thank you, Noel. I'm seeing some common themes. I'm sure the audience, our Sunday Supper family, is seeing the connections as well.
Yeah.
So, Tanisha, what about you?
This is causing me to remember that I've been out of school for a very long time, and school is probably very different. But I love Dariana and Noel's current perspectives, and I agree wholeheartedly. I think what's missing, what's working, and what's the third one?
Yeah, what's working, what's missing, and what would you change?
Okay, so what worked for me, I really like the exposure, right? So coming from Harlem, my community was diverse in a sense, socioeconomically, because you do have some middle class Black families in Harlem as well. But I feel like going to boarding school was definitely an exposure experience, and even my independent school was an experience that you just can't measure that. And so I think that definitely works. I know it's difficult for some kids to assimilate or even find their place once they're in a new place, like a private school or a boarding school. But I think the overall first step of exposure really can make a difference in a child's life. So I think that works. Now, that's the first step. Like all that other stuff can be talked about in more detail. What is missing? I definitely think and agree with financial literacy. I also think career options, right? And like, again, goes back to exposure, like teaching. I never knew about public relations before I entered college. When I was in high school, it was very much like business, law, teacher, it was kind of the basics. And no one ever kind of exposed me to other career options. My father worked in construction and my mother worked in telecommunications. So, I mean, I was really I knew the basics when it came to careers. So I wasn't exposed to PR, public relations, until I was even in my junior year in college. And I just think about like how I would have maybe approached the industry a little differently, or my career trajectory a little differently, if I would have known about it a little earlier. So I think that's definitely missing. And what could improve? A lot, right? Again, I'm tapping into like my memory. I would think the understanding of like where people are coming from, right? Like understanding that Black students and Latino students are not a monolith, right? We all kind of come from different communities and different perspectives, and not treating us all the same when it comes to diversity and inclusion and what we each need. I think that's definitely missing for sure.
That actually, reminds me of, the incredible work that you're doing on the task force that you mentioned, which kind of like relates to, what you're talking about in terms of exposure, not just to vast people and but also career exposure, which is just so key for our community. So thank you for sharing that. What about you, Christopher? Tell
Um,
us, give us your wisdom.
well, we'll see about it, but yeah, I think in terms of what's working, what's missing, and what would change. I think one of the things that's working, and could definitely be improved, but I think is that the kids are together like in a social environment, and they have to like when you do a group project, like like you have to actually figure out and deal with like the other students. And that's some of the most important skills. And I think there's a lot more we could do there, but I think it's really like one of the things with remote learning that I've noticed is I think it's a lot harder for people to get that thing that already is working well of like, hey, I actually have to figure out how do I interact with these kids I don't like, kids I do like, kids who don't like me or do like me, how do I navigate that? And so I think doing that early and with other people who are not just your family is really important. I think that I'm not 100% sure in terms of like things to change, but I do think, and I think different schools are going to be very different depending on the resources, the community and stuff. But I think the outputs that we are expecting from schools are things that. So I used to do some tutoring, and I'm starting to get back into it. And I'm looking at like the Common Core math and Common Core reading, and like what are the goals for kids? And a lot of them are like kids should be able to read these books, and they should be able to do these kind of equations and stuff. And I think maybe more things along the lines of like students should have been introduced to at least one thing that they find very interesting is as like a success metric, right? Or a student should be able to be comfortable not knowing the answer to something for a long time, and eventually figuring it out. Like, I think there's a lot of things that are actually a lot more important than the specific kind of knowledge. And I understand why, because like he's like, hey, we need some way to measure how are we doing as a country in education. So, if kids can't do their times tables, we're going to say that's a problem. But most of the things I think that are important, at least that I've found in my career and that I've seen from others, are actually like caring about something and like having the agency for stuff, and then being able to deal with something for a long time, wrestle with something for a long time without really knowing the answer immediately. And then to echo kind of what Dariana was saying is I think interdisciplinary for me, before private school, I went to a charter school, Amber Charter School. We did, I think it was 3 days out of every week of all our instruction in Spanish. So we did math in Spanish, we did reading in Spanish, we did history in Spanish, and then 2 days in English. And that was one of the most valuable educational experiences I had because I wasn't thinking about like learning Spanish during those classes, but it became a very natural part of my education. And like, I can still speak pretty decent Spanish today because early on, I got exposure to it, and I kind of it wasn't weird that you would do your history work in Spanish to me. And I think stuff like that is actually really powerful and something the education system is uniquely able to do. So I think maybe changing some of our outputs that we're expecting, and yeah, like Dariana was saying, like can we be more multidisciplinary? I think are going to be really valuable things.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing. I definitely see themes, and I actually also had the same experience in terms of it's interdisciplinary. And that wasn't my first experience with that was my freshman year in college as well. But I'm curious because we have a young entrepreneur and a more established and seasoned entrepreneur on the panel. Noel, do do you
Yeah.
find that what the skills that Tanisha mentioned are those resonating for you in terms of your experience in high school or throughout your educational career? Have you had opportunities to expand on those?
Yeah, I feel that it all came at different times. Um, it came at different times because it like life is like a learning process. So people may pick up things at an earlier age or later age, depending on like what they're doing. So I got to pick it up relatively like, early because I did have an entrepreneur class, which taught me how to like think like an entrepreneur outside of school and finding out like not everything has to be done like the way you think it should be done. There's different ways to do it.
Okay, so you had the
but
structure.
definitely, yeah, her skill sets, yes, I feel that you definitely need that.
Okay, so Tanisha, I'm curious because it sounds like Noelle had a structured environment that provided the opportunity in school to explore entrepreneurship, whereas you, it sounded like, kind of stumbled across it. Um, is that a correct assessment of what you described?
Absolutely. And I'm very happy to know that he's already experienced it and is already taking steps towards it, because you got to like kind of fail fast when it comes to entrepreneurship. So if you start younger, that's even better. I think that unfortunately, and this is kind of talks to what Chris was saying about output. There's this idea that success is only if you work somewhere, right? You become a CEO, or like you kind of have to go through the ranks. So I think that's being in private school, going to boarding school, then going to HBCU. My mind was always very much like, I have to join a company, I have to be an employee. And I was never taught, like I was just never told, you can make money on your own if you have an idea, if you want to do something, if you have that in you. And I feel like people saw things in me, independence, obviously, that led me to boarding school, that could have been fostered for entrepreneurship, but it happened when it was supposed to happen. Like Noelle said, life is a learning process, and I learned about it when I was supposed to. But I would definitely agree, like it's very important that kids or young adults start to learn about entrepreneurship younger, so that they can understand how to fail, how to not do things well, how to maybe think, okay, maybe I do want to work for someone, or maybe I want to do both. I want to be an entrepreneur. There's just so many options for success and career trajectory that we have to get out of this idea that there's these 5 lanes that you have to stay in. So yeah, I definitely stumbled upon entrepreneurship, but the great thing about it was I was very supported by my family, friends, and community once I did decide to do it. And then obviously, I believe that most entrepreneurs are successful because they're naturally entrepreneurs, they're naturally innovators, visionaries. I think some of it is taught, but majority of it is like a natural inclination to be that, which is why you see some people become founders but not CEOs, right? Like there's just something in people who start businesses and start organizations. So yeah, I really had a lot of support, which was really great. And I hope you do too, Noah.
Thank you. Thank you.
That's incredible. What about you, Dariana? So thank you for sharing that, Tanisha. That's amazing. Do you find that you are learning or honing the skills that Chris described as a software engineer, which is kind of in line with what it is that you want to do in your educational journey? Have you had those opportunities to hone in on those skills?
Yeah, I think I have. I think that I've been able to participate in like computer science courses like since my freshman year. So I went from like intro to computer science, where you talk about like JavaScript and like processing, and then moving on to like more complex languages. But I would say that it's not a requirement. I mean, in Riverdale, you only have to take like for one semester a computer science course, which I think is good at exposing students. But I don't think they really emphasize the importance of being like familiar with these languages and like how important it is to have some skill set in order to be successful in the future. But I also think, to like Tanisha's point about entrepreneurship, I don't think I've ever, and I guess also to the importance of being able to fail and like understand that. I think that private school doesn't really cultivate that environment, because it is a very competitive environment. And regardless of like, oh, we're all about community, it's also about like you need to get good grades because you want to go to college X, college Y. So I think that in order to like foster that community of entrepreneurship, you also need to foster an environment where people feel comfortable enough to take those risks, and know that like when you expose yourself to different environments and different, I guess, courses, like a grade is like not relevant in that conversation. So I think in private school, like entrepreneurship is a beautiful thing, but it's not cultivated in these incredibly competitive environments.
Wow. Did I tell you guys that you were going to get gems dropped today? I thank you all for sharing that, because what it reminds me of, we saw some consistent themes between you, which was this notion of we can reimagine an education that enables collaborative, peer-to-peer learning and teaching, it sounds like. We also have reimagined in terms of what works, this notion of financial literacy. And even in the predominantly white institutions or private schools where you would think it would be an automatic, it's lacking because the assumption is it's known, it's addressed in the home. So our Black and brown students are not getting financial literacy, whether they're attending public school, private school, and boarding school. Did you get that, Tanisha, in boarding school? Financial literacy? No. And yet, if we think about education as the greatest equalizer and the greatest liberator, how is it possible that if the end goal is financial freedom, our students leave the K-12 space, or for that matter, the college space, without understanding that important life skill, how to manage money, how to make money, how to become entrepreneurs, and ultimately, whether they're entrepreneurs or intrapreneurs, Tanisha, as you mentioned, the end goal is to become owners. Whether you're an entrepreneur that's a shareholder, driving value at public companies and thus influencing systemic structures that enable these inequities, right? As a shareholder, you can demand change, or as an entrepreneur, you can build wealth, pass it on, and also affect change in terms of proximity to power because of wealth. So we as a community, I think, need to start to think differently about these skill sets, whether it's financial literacy or health, as I like to say, but also this entrepreneurship path as a pathway, a learning pathway that can be part and parcel of a college career journey as well. So it is our goal to make sure that our young people leave us with multiple gold cards in their back pocket, such that they are constantly employed, employable, and employing as well. So thank you all for sharing that. I think this is a perfect segue to what we have learned as a result of this rapid innovation, which is around 21st century skills. Many of you, all of you, I think alluded to most of it. So if we could share the 21st century skills slide for the benefit of everyone watching at home. This is, when we think about the rapid innovation that's happening over the next decade, I'll just share a little tidbit with you. The World Economic Forum is projecting that we will need to reskill 1 billion people. And by reskill, we mean retrain and or upskill about 1 billion people in the world, because 42% of the people will essentially be out of jobs. And so when we think of crisis, we tend to think negatively, but in every crisis, there's opportunity. And so this conversation is about giving you a shift in paradigm in the way that you think about reimagining not just education, but how you position yourself in this fourth industrial revolution. Essentially, in the next decade represents the most prosperity that we would have experienced in not just in our lifetime, but in the history of the world. More millionaires will be made in the next decade than in any other time in our lifetime. And it's all a function of what we're calling, or what is being termed as the new roaring 20s, which harkens back to the 1920s when the US was filled with a lot of prosperity. And there are 5 key platforms that you saw there around blockchain technology, around artificial intelligence, around energy storage, et cetera. And there's 14 different technology applications that applies to. But what's important to note here is that while many jobs will be replaced by the robots that we all see, our day starts with a phone, right? How many of us, if we could raise our hand, how many of us use the phone the minute we wake up? Right? You use AirPods. It really is back to the future. And I know I'm dating myself, but the parents will attest, it's really starting to become like the Jetsons. In that last slide, I don't know if you saw on the upper left-hand corner, I know it passed a bit quickly. We have, and actually Chris could probably attest to this, the Jetsons era has arrived in 2021, people. we will have 4 civilians flying into space. For those of you that might have seen the Super Bowl, it was announced at the Super Bowl in November. And so they're talking about intergalactic flights. Christopher, maybe you could share a little bit, but it's something about there's a flight that's going to happen from New York to Australia in 2 hours, which is like, sign me up for that. Uh, any day of the week and twice on Sunday. Can you talk, Christopher, a little bit about what are the skills that you're seeing? Where is innovation going exactly? And how can we, as communities of color, position ourselves to really kind of take advantage of those opportunities, both as shareholders in these companies that are going to be multi-trillion-dollar businesses and platforms, but also as potential, employees?
I think that's a sorry. I think that's a good question. I think so. So just a couple of thoughts on that. I think that's a really good. I think it's a really good prompt. I'm a little personally, just my personal opinion. I'm not certain like how much every sector of the economy is going to be completely changed at the rate people think. I think there's going to be a lot of it's very difficult to predict how technology is going to evolve. But I think by this year, if you there are a lot of things like we're supposed to be starting the Artemis project. That's supposed to start the Artemis project. Supposed to have like the beginnings of a base on the moon. A lot of the projects you were talking about, like, and that are really cool and exciting, are like things that we would if we had done this in 2010, we would have said the next 10 years, these things are going to happen, and so I think a really crucial thing though is I think there's two things that I think are really interesting. One is like, what do you think is not going to change in the future? And I think those are actually really interesting questions to ask. Like, for instance, you're talking about ownership. I think it's actually like businesses like Noel was talking about real estate, right? It's unclear exactly what transportation is going to look like. Yeah, maybe people will be getting into spaceships and going from New York to Australia. Or maybe they'll be going in hyperloops, or maybe they'll be like, who knows, like what the best transportation is going to end up being. But no matter what it is, the people who own the land that is going to need to be used to transport people or like to be destination are going to be really important people to decide what happens, And if you just look at the past, right, like, so there was a time we had no subway systems, right? And today you have subway systems, but in Chicago, a lot of them don't go below 95th Street. And it's like, why is that, right? And it's because the people who decide when we do these projects that affect the public and the way they work, it's the people who have access to, like you said, capital or property. So it's actually, I think just as important as like reskilling to be familiar with computing and all these new technologies. I think it's also important, like the classic, like a lot of the things, honestly, like Noel's doing, like what is the land? How do I figure out how to make use of the land that's there? Like, what are the products that people want and how do I get them to them? The people who are actually going to decide what the outcome is for most people are not necessarily the people making the technology, although I think those people have, a lot of power and it's important but it's actually going to be the people who own the resources or have access to the capital or stuff to kind of direct it. So I think that's something that's going to be really important when people talk about, doing a point-to-point transport on a spaceship or what have you. Figuring out like what is the way that you can use the capital you have access to or the resources you have access to make that something that benefits everybody, and not benefiting like a small group of people or something like that. I just want to clarify, these are entirely my opinions. There's
no,
I'm
absolutely.
not speaking for SpaceX or any other group. Yeah, this is just what I think. Yeah.
We appreciate that, Christopher, because it does shed light on the fact that some of the jobs that you might have all seen in one of the slides that are being replaced, some of them, like sales, will never be replaced, right? The notion of intuition, creativity, empathy, for the moment is not going to be something that machines will be able to learn. And so there's this notion of human design thinking as it relates to us still needing to add value as human beings for certain jobs, particularly in software sales, which is a very lucrative business. But a lot of my colleagues in HR are saying that young people are not necessarily interested in sales because, especially and they come from under-resourced communities, the idea of sales is when you work, for instance, as a cashier at a fast food restaurant, and not necessarily this notion of the skill sets that you need to build, as a consultant standpoint, really helping a client think through problems and how to solve them. Right, that's essentially what a salesperson does. So we just have to reframe, I think, a lot of these opportunities in ways that not only are we exposing students to them, but that they understand, the depth of experience that they would ultimately have when they do that. That's a good point that you also raised, Christopher, because this notion of real estate is another avenue that is a wealth building avenue that unfortunately we are just not exposed to as a community enough. And so when we think about diversifying, our portfolio and building wealth and being able to accumulate wealth that is passed down from generation to generation, it is very well known that over 80% of the millionaires in the world own real estate. Little did we, at least I'll speak for myself, ever really pay attention to the hotels and the monopoly board. We just always just went around like it was Parcheesi. We didn't really understand that notion. But curious from your perspectives, how, and obviously, Noel, you are a resident, a real estate person. Weigh in on real estate. Have you given thought to real estate in terms of building your own wealth, and or your families? How are you thinking about that going forward?
Yeah. So I feel like it's all based on like connections and networking. I think it all comes back to that. And how Tanisha said earlier, like it's about being an entrepreneur and having that mindset already before actually being in that type of business. So I feel that with real estate too, you have to be like an entrepreneur because you're like your own person, that's your own business. I feel it comes back to like networking, connections, and I'm sorry, can you say your question again so I can answer it?
Yeah, no. Just curious. Obviously, you're looking at real estate as a profession for yourself, which is phenomenal that
Right.
you even have that foresight. Because a lot of youth and even adults, I'll say in our communities, don't really think about becoming property owners or real estate investors, even as a method to build wealth. When we have been sold this idea of consuming versus producing, right? And so we are often taught to rent versus purchase. And when we want to keep up with the Joneses, what we have been taught is this American dream of buying a single family home with the white picket fence, the dog, right, the 2.5 kids, and yet what we know builds wealth is this notion of purchasing a multifamily property or a multifamily unit such that your equity pays for itself over time, right? Because you were renting part of your property and then you're building out equity, building cash, and now reinvesting in another property. So curious from your perspective, is your thought that you want to invest in property, or just work in the real estate industry, or do both? And if you can explain why, what is your logic behind it, and who prompted you to think about real estate?
Got you. Okay, so the way I'm like thinking about real estate is more like a passion than money, because I feel that I'm really interested in real estate, and it could go for any job really, like because if you like something that you're doing, you're not gonna feel like you're actually working, or you're not gonna actually be stressed about it. And I feel the same way towards real estate. And I feel like you said, it's like a monopoly game, and um, everybody owns businesses, houses, and you don't really tend to think about it until you're in that environment. So I feel that I'm doing it more for my passion than like wealth, because um, I mean, yes, wealth comes with it, and which is a good thing. But I feel that if that's all I thought about, I wouldn't like really get far, because you do have to think like as an entrepreneur, like I said earlier, because that's the only way you can explore your options, you know?
That's right. Your why has to be bigger.
Yeah.
That's right. Thank you for that, Noel. That's wonderful. Yes, Dariana, you had something to say, to share?
I actually have a question for Noelle and Tanisha, if that's fine.
Yeah.
Because you're talking about like entrepreneurship, and I guess I'm currently looking at a more like academic side of things in terms of like just like studying systems, like dismantling them, if you will. But so I guess for entrepreneurship, you both mentioned that it's something that's very intuitive and something that some people either have or they don't. So I guess my question to you would be, how do you teach people who don't might not necessarily have that like intuition how to be effective entrepreneurs, because I feel like it's still an important skill set to have, if that makes sense. So like
No,
how do you teach that to something that's like not like just intuitive for some others?
of course. Tanisha, would you like to go first? I could go. I don't mind. Okay. So I think you teach that by like for example, like me, my school, they offer like a mentor program, and my mentor is a business and he's in real estate. So I feel that it all comes with like looking up to somebody, because a lot of people aren't um like fortunate to have that like from being born, you know what I'm saying? But I feel that when you learn over time, it could like benefit you, and you need it in everything, not only entrepreneurship. So I feel that you have to learn that from like mentors. Like Tanisha could be my mentor since she's already been there. She's done that. She has that experience, you know? So you always have to like look up to somebody and have a passion. I think it all comes down to passion too.
That was great. I think, Dariana, that I want to get away from this idea that like everyone has to be an entrepreneur too, right? Like I think that like came in a big wave, like made like around the 2010s. And I really want to get away from the fact that everyone needs to be an entrepreneur, because they don't. And they shouldn't, right? Like we need really strong people who work for companies, whatever they, employees is kind of the standard word. You need really, really strong employees that care about your company just as much as you do, or just care about your vision as an entrepreneur, as someone who's a CEO. And so it's not always like, but I do think that the skills that entrepreneurs have, this idea kind of, going back to what Christopher was saying, of like, it's okay to fail. It's okay to think about success, not quantitatively, but more so like, what did I learn? Like, how am I better versus like, how many dollars did I bring into the company, or how many cases did I close, right? So I think the skills of it definitely is something that people should learn. Like, be okay with failing, be okay with learning, be okay with finding purpose in your work. Like, I think those are kind of big markers, but I don't want you to think that like you wanting to do something that is a little bit more just, traditional is not great, because it is. And you can find ways to be innovative, right? Which is a huge part of entrepreneurship in traditional work. Like you may start a program, right, through whatever job that you get, or a company that you work for. You may start a program for a mentorship pipeline program for inner city kids in order to become criminal defense lawyers. That's entrepreneurship. You may start a nonprofit. You may love art and want to just draw. You know what I mean? Like there's so many different ways to be an entrepreneur. That's not the like, okay, now start a business and get venture capital. Like I want us to get away from that. So I would say that not everyone is built to be an entrepreneur, but that's for a reason. We're all here to do our thing, right? And so when you don't have those innate natural skills and you're like, I want to do something a little bit more 9 to 5, great. That's awesome. I wish I wanted to do that, so I have a paycheck every 2 weeks. But I think just understanding like those kind of big soft skills of like dealing with people, being like you're like working on your communication, being able to communicate with people effectively, and with thought and care, and like for who they are. Like I think those skills, those things, being able to fail and be okay with it and jump back with new ideas, being creative, those are the things that really, really matter. So yeah. And how do you get those? Oof. Um, Experience definitely will push you towards that and kind of make you have that. I think like college definitely, definitely will help you do that, because for most kids it's their first time being alone and making decisions on their own. So I think definitely like life experience will kind of teach you those soft skills. But if you don't have them or you don't feel like you're getting them, I think that a mentor is definitely great too.
Mm, fantastic advice. Thank you so much, Tanisha. All righty. So as we move on to dessert, thank you so very much. That was incredible. We're going to move on to our Q&A dessert course of this Sunday supper, as promised, in the time we have here remaining. We're going to go to the chat and see if we have any questions that have been submitted. It looks like I see one. And this is for all of the panelists. This is a good one. This is a really good one. What advice would you give to school systems who focused on standardized tests and haven't invested in helping kids learn through failing? So I know the learning through failing came up a lot in our entrepreneurial discussions, but also academically. So what advice would you each give school systems that are focused on standardized testing and haven't invested in helping kids learn through failing?
I would say be innovative, because why are you still dealing with archaic thought processes around success? Right, school and education is about innovation and creativity. The reason why I loved my independent school for middle school, Manhattan Country School, we went to a farm 3 times a year and we had to live on a farm. So you took a bunch of city kids, you took them to a farm for a week, no phones, no TV, nothing. The learning that I got from that very just different learning experience, unmatched. You have to be able to kind of go against the system. And I know that's difficult, and I don't work in education, so I also don't want to say this and say it's so easy, just do that. I understand it's not easy, but how can you be a beacon of education, hope, future thinking if you're not actually doing that in your day-to-day work? So I would just push leaders to be man, we got to be different, which isn't always the easiest thing. So
Thank you for that. It absolutely isn't, but if it, everything worth doing, right? That's wonderful. All righty.
Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, just one thing to say on that, kind of similar in that, I think the intent behind a lot of standardized tests is really positive one. It's how do we measure whether or not we're doing a good job for kids, right? But I think that one thing I think people often neglect in when they're saying oh, but we've got to adhere to these standards for the state, so how can we do anything, is I think actually a lot of kids already have really strong ideas of things that they want to do and things they want to understand, right? And I think I think it's very rare that we just ask the students in class what you say, okay, you guys have read your stuff, you know your times tables, now now please spend some time, identify things you're interested in, and we're going to hold you to whatever goals you've set for yourself. And I think that's a really important life skill. Once you leave college, it's whether you're an entrepreneur or work in public service or what have you, right? You have to decide for yourself, what is good enough? What do I want? What do I want for other people? And I think that kids are actually ready in many ways in a lot of areas to have a more active role in their education. In a lot of school systems around the world, kids have a lot more of an active role. It's not just we are going to give the kids these things. We're also learning from the kids. They're talking about technology. I mean, some of the people who understand some of the ways that technology can be monetized and all those things, or used for expression or what have you, are younger kids are probably the best experts in a lot of those things. So anyway,
So true. So
just
true.
if you just ask the kids, I think there's actually a lot that you can get out of it in any school. Even in schools where people think there's largely disciplinary problems, I know that's a whole thing. A lot of times kids have ideas on that too. It's not, you don't have to do it alone. The kids can actually help you teach themselves.
Right. And right. And that's a life skill unto itself, right? That they are involved in the solutions, right, for their community's problems. In the time we have remaining, we have one more question very quickly. I'm just going to point to it. How do you think the existence of racially segregated schools hinders innovation? And how do you think this can be challenged and corrected? So all panelists, 30-second answers. How do you think the existence of racially segregated schools hinders innovation, and how do you think this can be challenged or corrected?
Now, I'm assuming they mean racially segregated schools, like schools that are only for Black and Latino kids, right?
Yes, well, you know, like PWIs, I'm assuming, and then, you know, New York has the most segregated schools in the country. So
okay, so not on purpose, but just by like the fact that they're racially segregated.
Right, through housing, right, policy predominantly.
Yeah.
Anyone want to take that?
That's a tough question.
I think I can say that. Sorry, this is actually my friend who's writing this question, Jada Grant. And I think she wants to clarify what she means by her question in the way that like we're understanding it. I think is different from the way that she intended it to be asked. So I think if we can just give her a second to like rephrase it, I think that might remember more.
So Jada, we may have to respond via writing though, because we want to definitely, you know, keep on time. And folks, it's Sunday evening. Folks have to kind of get back to what they're doing. But I certainly appreciate the question. We will certainly pass it along. We actually have an exit survey. I do want to take a moment to thank, please join me everyone in thanking our amazing panelists. Thank you all for your wisdom. Thank you for speaking with such candor. We really appreciate it. There were a lot of gems that you dropped. It sounds like the education that we are reimagining is one that is collaborative in nature, that gives students power and voice to be empowered with their own learning and following their own journey as it relates to financial literacy and interests that they may have, be it in entrepreneurship. But really, it sounded like a lot of it is really around exposure and really broadening the lens for education, to broaden the lens of what students are exposed to so that they can make those informed decisions to be entrepreneurs or entrepreneurs, right? But the goal of education is, again, to level the playing field, and we certainly hope that your candor and your comments have informed what that looks like going forward. So we thank you for that. In the meantime, you know, on behalf, obviously, of the Eagle Academy Foundation, we thank you for joining us today. There are plenty and a plethora of resources. We want you all to walk away enlivened and with hope that the future is very bright, and it has never been brighter for our people if we seize the day. So there are some resources in the chat and additional resources that we will also share with you via email in the emails that you use to register for this event, such that you can learn artificial intelligence and coding and all of these different applications or programs that are available and free, because companies are rushing to really hire Black and brown people. So if you look at an organization like 110, which is hiring 1 million Black people by the year 2030, or even in our own here in New York City, the New York City CEO Council is another resource for you. They're looking to hire 100,000 low-income New Yorkers by the year 2030. 25,000 of them will be CUNY students. So the time is ripe. It is a wonderful opportunity for us to be engaged and continue to join us. So you have the exit survey. Please, please, please fill out the survey. We will send additional resources to you via email. On behalf of, as I was saying, of the Eagle Academy Foundation and this wonderful consortia of nonprofit leaders of color, we bid you a wonderful evening. We invite you to come back and sit at the Sunday supper table after spring break. If you will receive an update through your registration email for the exact date for that, but please look out for that and enjoy the remainder of Women's History Month. Thank you all for joining us. Be well, be safe, and remain healthy. Thank you. Good night. Thank you, guys.